Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is the final episode of the nutrient series deep dive and today we are going to be talking about something that can often confuse a lot of people in the hobby, and it's almost like the forgotten nutrient because it is in fact a nutrient, and that is CO2. Because depending on who you ask or whatever content you might consume on YouTube, it's either you absolutely need it or you don't need it at all. And then there's the whole thing of CO2 gas versus CO2 liquid. So in this video, I'm going to break it down as best I can and as simply as I can so that you can understand it, especially if you're a beginner, and hopefully even if you're experienced, you learn something as well. So first, we're going to sort of follow the structure of the rest of the videos in the series. We're going to look at what CO2 actually does in your tank and how to tell if it's off and any sort of problems that you might encounter. Then we're going to discuss if you even need it. And then we're going to discuss if this is actually better than this. So this was going to originally be two different videos, but I think that it is probably going to work better and sort of give you all the information if we just do it in one video. So it's going to be a long one, so buckle up, guys. So let's start off with what CO2 actually does in the aquarium. So to keep it simple, plants basically use light to create energy. We know this as photosynthesis, and they use CO2, carbon dioxide, as the raw material to actually build themselves. So when your plants grow new leaves, new stems, new roots, they're literally building this out of carbon, and that carbon comes from CO2. So light equals energy, CO2 is the building material, and the fertilizers provide the support. So without CO2, there is no or very little or very poor new growth. So in nature, when we look at the world, when we look at river systems, CO2 is constantly being replaced. There's water moving, surface agitation, there are things decomposing and creating organic carbon. But in your tank, it's a closed system. So without things like CO2 injection, your tank will probably sit anywhere between 1 and 3 parts per million, give or take. And that's sort of like the natural CO2 background levels in the tank. And that's not really enough for growth. You might get a little bit of slow growth, but not much more. So that comes down to the question, do you need CO2? And this is important because no, you don't always need CO2. I have 4 tanks and 2 of my tanks are low tech, and it's just managing expectations. So if you're running low light, if you're using easy plants, and if you're using things like epiphytes, so anubias, java fern and mosses, you can absolutely create a beautiful and healthy tank without it. And you shouldn't really run into too many issues, but generally having things like a good substrate system and moderately powerful lighting will definitely help in the success of a no CO2 tank. But obviously if you start pushing things with, such as strong lighting, if you want carpet plants, if you've got quite fancy ornamental stems and things that are regarded as advanced, that just need that little bit more, then obviously CO2 is going to become your limiting factor, and you're asking plants to grow faster, you're asking things of the plant, but you're not giving them carbon to do it. So what does a CO2 issue actually look like? What do plants look like if they're not getting enough CO2? And similar to other nutrient deficiencies, probably similar to things like nitrogen, it's going to be things like slow or stalled growth, weak or small new leaves. You might have plants melting, and you're going to have algae start to appear. And various algae can come from this, notably BBA, staghorn algae, and perhaps even things like hair algae, although I wouldn't say they're directly related to CO2, but certain algae are definitely going to take hold. And this is a big one. Everything might look fine. You might think, oh, I might turn my lighting up. Plants are growing healthy, I'll try and put a little bit more light on the tank, and suddenly algae shows up. And that's usually down to CO2, because as you've increased your lighting, you haven't increased CO2 to go with it, and also the nutrients as well. You might not have sort of bumped them up in order to sort of combat the lighting that you've put on your tank. And this is sort of like the balance triangle. So CO2, lighting and fertilizer all kind of have to be in balance with each other. So if you increase one, you generally have to increase the other. And if you decrease one, you also generally have to decrease the other. But much like lighting, CO2 is sort of like a defining factor, a defining input in your tank as to how much your plants are sort of going to need and how much they're going to need to use. Another thing that is extremely important with CO2 is its stability. And this is actually huge in terms of how well your plants grow, but also the sort of production of algae as well. So it's not always just about how much CO2 you have, it's about how stable it is. And if your CO2 is unstable and not consistent, plants struggle and algae will definitely appear. I have a video on BBA, which talks about the correlation with BBA and CO2 and flow, so I'd recommend checking that out. But a stable level of CO2 is always going to be better than a higher unstable one. And by stable, what I mean is that you are using a good quality regulator that is reliable, with some kind of reliable diffusing method, whether or not it's inline, in tank, or a reactor. Reactors aren't something that I'm all that familiar with, but I use an in-tank diffuser. Just a good quality one that produces really fine micro bubbles, and also ensuring that those bubbles are distributed around the tank evenly using the flow of the filter. So that's what I mean by sort of stable. And when setting up CO2, it's always best to have it come on between 1 and 2 hours before the lights turn on, and sort of like an hour before the lights turn off, because you want that CO2 to be at sort of peak levels when the lights come on, so the plants can just photosynthesize straight away. And one thing that always gets asked, is a question that I always get asked, is how many bubbles per second do you inject into your tank? It's a pointless question to ask in a way, because it's going to be different for everybody, because people are going to have different background levels of CO2 in their tank. That's going to depend on things like substrate and just like the water in general, surface agitation and things like that, and sort of like regulator precision. So asking like bubbles per second probably isn't going to help you in terms of dialing in your CO2. And what you're aiming for is dissolved CO2. And the best way to check that is using a drop checker. There are like electronic methods to do this, like using like pH indicator things, but I'm not experienced in them and I wouldn't feel comfortable telling you about them. So we will go with the easiest, pretty reliable and sort of like cheapest method, which is a CO2 drop checker. So we'll just run through what a drop checker does and how it works, because this is going to help prove something later in the video. But inside a drop checker is a special solution. It's a pH reactive solution, usually with 4 degrees of carbonate hardness and a pH indicator dye. And CO2 from your tank diffuses, it kind of gets into that solution, and when CO2 dissolves in water, it forms a weak carbonic acid. This therefore lowers the pH. So the more CO2 that you have, the lower the pH, and therefore you get the colour change. We've mentioned blue is low CO2, green is about right, and yellow is too much. So with a pH drop checker, you're not directly measuring CO2, you're measuring the pH change caused by CO2. And because the solution is standardised, it's a known degree of carbonate hardness, this colour can roughly correspond to the CO2 level in your tank. You're aiming for a stable lime green coloration during the photo period. It might get a little bit yellow, but if the fish aren't gasping at the surface, you're usually okay. And it's important to note that that colour reaction is usually 1 to 2 hours delayed, so you're not quite looking at it in real time, which is why I said that it's not perfectly accurate, but it gives you a good indication. Something that I do when I'm setting CO2 up on a tank is, especially in the beginning, I move the drop checker, or I just put multiple drop checkers in the tank just to gauge where the flow's hitting, because you might find that obviously closest to your CO2, you're probably going to get a lime green colour, but in sort of like the more dead spots of your aquarium, that colour change might not happen. And obviously if you know places where CO2 isn't getting, you can perhaps alter your flow or change your pipes, or even move where your CO2 diffuser is in your tank. And obviously, if you're kind of getting green in all areas at similar sort of times, then you kind of know, okay, there's good diffusion going on in the tank. Okay, so now you understand what CO2 is doing in your tank, how to measure it, if you even need it, and like the signs to look out for. But now we're going to get into the part that might confuse people, especially people new. I'm not going to go really deep into the science of it because it's a bit crazy, but I am a little bit, so bear with me. But you might hear people say, I don't need CO2, I just use liquid CO2. And is this the same thing, and is it giving you the same result? Is one better than the other? Are they doing the same thing? Or is one even doing what it says it should do? So let's zoom in to this whole thing slightly, and we're going to cover some things that we probably learnt back in secondary school science class if you weren't busy like burning your friend's planner with a Bunsen burner. Obviously, inside a plant, growth happens through photosynthesis. And the second stage of photosynthesis, because that's the thing we always kind of talk about, but there is a really, really important stage of photosynthesis, or sort of like carbon building within plants. And this is called the Calvin cycle. And it's this part where CO2 actually becomes plant mass. And the key step here is called carbon fixation. And basically, carbon fixation in simple terms just means taking carbon from CO2 gas and locking it into a molecule, and that then becomes part of the plant. And that's how you go from seemingly invisible gas to essentially leaves and stems and root and plant mass. And there is one extremely important enzyme that controls this step. It has got a really long name, but we're going to call it rubisco. And its job is simple, and that is to grab CO2 and fix it to the plant in order to make plant mass. I think I also read that this is one of the oldest known enzymes in the world, which is quite interesting. But this enzyme has a flaw, and that is that it can also mistakenly grab oxygen instead. And when that happens, energy gets wasted and growth slows down. The sugar production isn't happening. And when this happens, this is called photorespiration. The fact is that when there is more available CO2, the better this process works. If you think about it, it's like a chance of odds. If you've just got lots of carbon and lots of oxygen, if you have more carbon than oxygen, likelihood is you're going to grab carbon rather than oxygen. And this is why CO2 gas works, because when you inject CO2 gas, you increase the dissolved carbon dioxide in the water, which means more carbon fixation is happening because it's more likely to grab CO2, less energy waste, and obviously faster, healthier growth. And you're directly feeding the process that builds actual plant mass. So now that we know that about gas, like gas carbon dioxide, let's look at what liquid CO2 is. So you'll see this marketed as carbon or like CChem-XL and things like that. But obviously this isn't actually CO2 gas. It's a chemical, usually something like glutaraldehyde, which I think is a 5-chain carbon, or it has a carbon skeleton. And basically plants can break it down slowly, but they will break it down, metabolize it, and basically use the carbon skeleton in order to provide themselves with some carbon to then produce plant mass. But obviously it's a lot slower and it's harder for the plant. CO2 gas is like pre-packaged goodness, whereas doing it with a liquid, it kind of takes a little bit more energy for the plant to do it. It works, but it's not the same. And it's not the same because it doesn't increase the CO2 levels in the water, and it doesn't improve carbon fixation in the sort of direct way that dissolving it does. And it doesn't improve carbon in the same direct way. if you were to dose something like CChem XL in your aquarium and put a drop checker in, your drop checker isn't going to change colour. There isn't any dissolved carbon in the water. And that's why I wanted to mention about the drop checker, to kind of prove this theory, if you like. The reason that people sort of think that liquid CO2 works, I guess, is because it can also damage algae. Because it is glutaraldehyde, it's a strong chemical. And this can sometimes look like it's helping plants because obviously you're reducing the algae. So it would give the impression that your plants are growing sort of like faster and better. And to an extent they will be, because as I say, it does provide the plant with some sort of carbon. It's just not in the volume or in the sort of preferred way of getting carbon. So I guess in simple terms, CO2 gas directly increases carbon fixation. It's sort of interacting with this rubisco enzyme, which is what it's designed to do. Whereas liquid carbon sort of indirectly and in a more limited fashion helps it. And it's also partly used as an algicide. So they're not the same. But that is not to say that something like a carbon supplement doesn't have its place in aquascaping. It's something that can definitely help and be used alongside a fertilization routine. I use it even though I use CO2. I don't use it in high amounts or regularly, just because it can be quite damaging to some sensitive leaf plants, especially things like lilies and some crypts as well. So it has its place, not knocking it as a product, but it shouldn't be equated as an alternative to CO2 because it isn't the same thing and it isn't going to give you the same results. So the final takeaway is, do you need CO2? And the answer is no, not always. You can definitely have a healthy tank without CO2. But if you want fast growth, compact growth, the healthiest, most optimal plants, if you want more demanding setups, if you're using high light and a good substrate system where light's going to be driving demand, substrate's going to be providing nutrients, CO2, especially CO2 gas, is going to make a massive difference. Because at the end of the day, CO2 isn't just another additive. It's literally the raw material that plants are built from. In fact, 50%-ish of a plant's dry mass is carbon. So that just shows how important this sort of nutrient is. It's why I wanted to leave it to last, because it's the biggest video and might be one of the most important of all. But as I say, it's not strictly necessary, providing that you understand your limitations and you set your expectations. And yeah, signs are a little bit harder with CO2. It generally comes with some algae issues at times, and it can just be stunted growth, leggy growth. Things aren't compact as you would like them. And obviously, if you're wanting to grow things like carpeting plants or the fancy rotala species and things like that, it's probably going to be something that you need to use in your aquarium. So that wraps it up for this nutrient deep dive series. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who's been watching this and for the really lovely comments that people have left, because it's really made it worthwhile. Because at the beginning I was like, is this even going to be interesting? Are people going to watch it? But I've had some really great sort of like encouraging comments from people. So thank you so much, obviously, especially if you've left a comment, and for watching and sticking through it this far. And I just kind of want to surmise something, which I was sort of like thinking about when I was creating this series. Because one thing that I don't want people to do is obviously watch each episode and be like, oh my God, I need to go out and buy iron. I need to start dosing iron, or I need to start dosing nitrate, or whatever it may be. Because that isn't the case, and that isn't the point that this series is trying to make. It's not to make you think, oh my gosh, I'm missing something, and go out and buy it. Because at the end of the day, we can follow science, we can follow the books, we can watch YouTubers like me saying all this stuff, but the only thing that's going to give you the sort of real feedback that you need is your aquarium and your plant's health. If you're watching these videos and you've watched me say that plants need nitrogen in order to build mass and and you're not dosing nitrogen, but your tank looks fine. Like, don't change anything. It's just these videos have sort of been designed to give you the knowledge, because it's the best thing to have when there's a problem. And even having all this knowledge, even me, who sort of, been in the hobby for sort of maybe 6-7 years, and I like to read a lot and learn a lot about it. And obviously I've been reading and learning lots for these videos. Even having this knowledge still doesn't always make it any easier when I have an algae issue. And a prime example would be the aquarium behind me. For a year straight, it has been the most trouble-free, I dare say perfect tank ever. And out of nowhere, or seemingly nowhere, it has a massive algae problem that I've been battling for the past sort of month. So yeah, it's like I don't want to come across like I'm being hypocritical or I know all this and my tanks are perfect, because it's certainly not the case. However, I kind of do know why it probably is happening and how to fix it. But there's been a few issues. Like, for example, I changed the light. I was kind of dialing the light in, because when you get a new light, it's always hard to sort of know. You kind of have to play around with it to see what sort of power you're going to need. And then the CO2 ran out, and I didn't realise for 2 weeks, and all the crypts melted. There you go. That's another thing with CO2. And then there's bits of BBA appeared because I cleaned the filter out, which increased the flow. And it started hitting bits of the hardscape that it obviously hadn't have been, because the slow must have slowed down over the course of a year with all the crap that had built up inside it. So it was a perfect storm of things changing, a lot of changes happening at once. And then, it's obviously just dealing with those issues. But the point is that I have some base level of knowledge to go, okay, here might be the problem. And that was the point of these videos, to just give you a sort of reference point to say, okay, this is the problem. This might be the solution, because the problem matches X, Y, and Z of what I think the solution steps could be. So don't just rush out and buy every single product just because I've said it, because that's definitely not the case. And if your tank's doing fine, don't change anything, because as we've established and as proof, tanks don't like sudden change. It can cause some imbalance issues, and balance is the word that is sort of key in this hobby. Thank you very, very much. I have actually really liked doing these videos, and I do want to do some more if anybody would even be interested in them. If we can find another topic to deep dive into, I've got a few ideas. So thanks, I guess. There is some builds coming, and when I get back from holiday, I think this is coming down. So there will be some cool stuff coming, hopefully, this year, alongside other deep dive and nerdy videos. So take care, and I will see you on the next one.